Congressman Joe Kennedy. As many of you know, he represents the Massachusetts 4th Congressional District. He was born in Brighton, in Boston, went to Stanford University for college, Harvard Law School, has worked in the Peace Corps, for 2 years, also worked on his re-election campaign for his great uncle, Senator Ted Kennedy as well, has served in Congress since 2000, or was elected to Congress in 2012, and represents the 4th District, which we also have a map of. It's kind of this long, elongated district here in Massachusetts. So we are so delighted to have him here with us. He's been an advocate for many, many, many different things, which he will also talk about. Energy costs, transgender rights, equal pay, immigration reform, all these things, which I'm sure he will talk about. And again, as we said, we'd love to have you think about some questions you'd like to ask him. So without further ado, Congressman Joe Kennedy.
Good morning. Hey, there we go. What's up? So you guys really didn't want to hear me speak, so I want to pull the fire alarm, huh? Good work. First off, thanks for having me. Thanks for the invitation. Thrilled to be with everybody. Big thank you to the Center for Civic Engagement, to Claudia and Terry. Thank you for facilitating the invitation. To Principal Turner, if you made it back in, maybe. There he is. Thanks. Sorry about the fire alarm. And your superintendent, who was back there and is right over there. Thank you very, very much for having me. So, I understand that some of you, anyway, would like to hear a little bit from me, which will make happen, but candidly, since I have the mic, I'm going to exercise a little bit of, I guess, legislative privilege here. And I want to hear from some of you guys. So, what's on your mind? What issues out there, as you think about the nature of our politics, the state of our country, what issues come to mind? Which issues are you concerned about? Which issues are you excited about? What's great? What's not? Just shout them out. I'm going to make a little list. Immigration. Impeachment. Oh, okay, hold on. I got to write it down. Immigration. School lunch. Like, what are you having for lunch? Or tacos. Tacos sound good. Immigration, school lunch, climate change. I'm sorry? AOC. Abortion. Minimum wage. Environmental what? Environmental reform. Different than climate change? Different than climate change? Okay. Mental health. Student debt. Gun violence. Abortion. Okay, hold on. I got gun violence. I got healthcare. I got abortion. Housing. What? We've had global warming 3 times. You can't just scream at me. I get that enough. Which one? Prison reform. Lobbying? What about lobbying? Special interest stuff? Lobbying, what about lobbying? Money in politics. Bipartisanship.
Gun control.
Net neutrality.
Was that already said?
Net neutrality.
Teacher salary.
Ooh. Somebody just got an A. Somebody just got an A. Good work, buddy. Teacher salaries. Anybody else? Automation. What else? Something about racial what? Racism. Something else over here. Comprehensive sex ed. International relations? Like any aspect of international relations, or just them in general? Being diplomatic with other countries? Huh. I imagine that you somehow think we're not. Foreign policy. American weapons in the Middle East. Okay, what? Middle East, Israel.
Tax cuts.
Tax cuts. There was one over here that I missed. Border Patrol. CBP. Anybody else? All right, so here's the list. All right, I'm going to read it back to you. Here's what I'm going to ask. You guys are going to get 3 votes each. I want to understand out of this incredibly impressive list which ones you guys really care about, okay? So I'm going to read through the list once, and then we're going to go through and vote, okay? Immigration, school lunch, climate change, AOC, minimum wage, mental health, student debt, gun violence, healthcare, abortion, housing, prison reform, lobbying, money in politics, bipartisanship, net neutrality, teacher salaries, automation, racism, comprehensive sex education, foreign policy, American weapons in the Middle East, Israel, tax cuts, and customs and border patrol immigration police. Okay? Immigration. School lunch. The guys in the back care what we're having for lunch. Good work. Climate change. Everybody. AOC. I won't tell her. That's right. Okay. Minimum wage. Mental health. Student debt. Gun violence. Some of you have voted 5 times already. Healthcare. Abortion. Housing. Prison reform. Lobbying. There you go. Money in politics. Bipartisanship. No one cares about bipartisanship. And you wonder why we are where we are. 4 people. Net neutrality. None of you surf the internet either. Teacher salaries. Every teacher raises their hand and nobody else. Automation. Racism. Comprehensive sexual education. There we go. Foreign policy. American weapons in the Middle East. Israel. Tax cuts. Customs and Border Patrol, immigration enforcement. All right. So first off, guys, great list. The ones that jumped off the page, immigration, climate change, I think almost every hand was up. Mental health, gun violence, student debt. Those were all at the top of the list, with I think, again, climate change and our unscientific poll here probably leading the way. So let me just say briefly on a couple of those things. First off, it's an incredible list of issues that are affecting our country. And it's, I think, a pretty powerful place to start a discussion about what your federal government is doing to address some of those concerns, and quite candidly, what we haven't done to address most of them. And that level of engagement, some of the areas where you see most of those hands come up, around healthcare, around immigration, around mental health, are areas that, from my perspective anyway, the federal government has long abdicated its responsibility to try to actually address these problems. And you see it fester over and over and over again, year after year, with dramatic human consequences. And so now you're seeing the ramifications of it play out in so many aspects across our society, and you see, I can feel, a boiling up of an effort to try to actually address some of those concerns. The challenge is that if you were with if we completed this exercise with a fellow member of Congress, a colleague of mine, from a different part of the country, you might have some of those same issues that would come up, and some of them might actually lead the way. But they're going to be, I imagine, for the opposite reasons or very different reasons that motivated your hands to go up. Yes, gun violence is a motivating factor in many other areas across this country, as is climate change, as is immigration particularly, as is healthcare. But the reasons why people care about it, the way they frame those issues, the way they think of those issues, ends up being very different. Part of my job, I believe, is to try to find ways where I can work together with a coalition of Democrats and Republicans to try to make progress on some of these issues where we can, given the fact that while Democrats control the House of Representatives, Republicans control the Senate and the White House, and so anything that actually is going to move, that is going to address any of the issues that you all suggest, is going to have to be bipartisan. It's not going to be everything that I would want in a solution, but it can get you some part of the way there. The alternative is to wait until, at least from my perspective, Democrats have control of the House, the Senate, and the presidency in order to put forth a much more comprehensive solution to some of those challenges. The flip side to that is that's probably going to be a while. And if you believe that there are real moral issues that we have to address today, I don't feel all that comfortable by telling people that are having still their children ripped away from their arms when they cross the border to say, hey, wait until you've got a Democratic president, hopefully in 2021. Wait until you have, at the very least, a Democratic majority in the Senate, if not a supermajority, which might take a while, before we're actually going to try to find a way to solve this problem. And so that's the push and pull, the tension that I feel of trying to find ways to meaningfully address some of these crises, while also recognizing that it's not going to be, if we are going to address it now, it's not going to be everything the way that I would want it to be if I could actually pass the bill that I would want it to pass. So that's at least how I frame some of these issues, also in some of the legislation that I've drafted or some of the legislation that I've signed on to, trying to put the marker down as to what a long-term solution ideally would look like, and then recognize that the way to get there is going to be a bit more iterative, piece by piece, trying to make sure that you put these ideas before all of you guys, your parents, the American public across the country, and push everybody to understand what that is, what our country is going to get from the approval of those policies, and what, candidly, we're also asking of our citizens to give, how we're asking you to contribute to it. And that's the give and take. Anybody have any idea what I actually do? Nobody. So, most folks don't have a clue, actually. My job is, I live in Newton, not all that far from here. I've got two little kids, a 1-year-old and a 3-year-old. The 1-year-old basically did not sleep last night, so that was a great way to start the day. I've basically been going through my own version of a fire drill for the past like 6 hours. So I spend about half my time in Massachusetts. After I leave here, I'm bouncing around the rest of my district. Part of that map that you saw before, I head down to the southern part of my district later this afternoon. I run around much of the district tomorrow on Saturday, holding office hours, which are forums where anybody can come on in and talk to me about whatever it is that they want to talk about. And half of my job, half of my staff, half of my time is here, trying to make sure that people, when you've got a question, a concern, a challenge with some sort of local policy or local program, Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, access to veterans benefits, that regardless of who you are, where you come from, whatever else, our office, Democrat, Republican, other, never voted before, vote every time, vote against me every time, doesn't matter. That my job is to make sure that when you run into an issue with your federal government, that we are there to help you and to try to make sure that you get the services that you deserve because you are a citizen of the United States of America, a resident here. And so that's half of my job. The other half of my job is down in Washington, D.C., trying to basically be your voice, your representative in Washington in the House of Representatives with regards to federal policy, to craft bills, to draft legislation, to pass legislation, to then come back and have the discussion with you about what I'm working on, why I've chosen some of those priorities, what that looks like, and what's going on. So that's only about half of my time, despite the fact that that's the part that gets the vast majority of attention, is what's actually going on in D.C. The crux of the real critical aspect of the job is how we are providing those services to our constituents around the 4th District every single day. So I spend an awful lot of time doing that. Any of you heard of this law called Obamacare? Any of you name a member of the House of Representatives that wrote it? For as much, ask that question all the time to crowds, no one ever has an answer. But for as much attention as what comes out of Washington, D.C. gets, that's probably the most famous law passed in at least the past decade. The president, as you all know, cannot write a bill. It has to come through the House and the Senate. They can draft a bill. No one has any idea as to what House members actually, how they draft legislation or work on that legislation. They will also never forget it when your brother or sister or son or daughter has had challenges getting the veterans benefits that they need and have earned and deserve, and that for some reason a bureaucracy won't let that happen, yet a member of Congress steps in and tries to deliver on that promise. And so that's kind of the way that we try to strike that balance as well. With that, I am happy to kick this open to questions that folks have. Ask away whatever you want, and any suggestions or ideas or words of wisdom or advice or anything else, have at it. Yeah, what's your name? Where are you from? You're from Newton. What's your name? What grade are you in?
My name's Lisa. I was just wondering what house committees like you serve on.
Junior?
Yeah.
Yeah? Lisa, I serve on one committee. The way that the kind of committee process ends up being a little bit complicated, oddly enough, because Washington's good at making simple things complicated. But there's committees, there's kind of 3 to 4 committees that have, that are the most sought after ones that have the most amount of power through a legislative process. The basic rule on that is if you serve on one of those committees, you can only serve on one committee. That's Ways and Means, the folks that deal with taxes, essentially. Energy and Commerce, which is the one that I sit on that has the broadest jurisdiction of any committee in Congress. So everything from healthcare to telecommunications to life sciences to professional sports teams, almost, the portfolio there is massive. And that's the one I sit on. And then Appropriations, which is the committee that actually deals with how they carve up the $4 trillion federal budget. So if you sit on one of those 3, they don't normally let you sit on another. My areas of focus underneath that committee, given that it's so vast, are important. Healthcare is number 1, with a particular focus on access to healthcare and mental and behavioral health. I sit on an energy committee, which is, I think, important for climate change, and then energy infrastructure, trying to make sure we keep energy rates competitive while also making good on the promises that climate change is real and we have a responsibility and opportunity to do something about it. And then the one I sit on this year is also oversight, which means for all of the stuff that we oversee, if I don't think the Trump administration is actually doing what they say they should do, or say they are doing, or that we think they should do, we get to oversee that and supposedly ask them questions and get answers, although they haven't really been all that willing to come in and give us answers. But that's, in theory, how it's supposed to work. Good question. Yeah. What's your name? What year are you?
I'm Laura. I'm a sophomore. This is a question you're probably tired of hearing about, but I feel a little contradicted.
You're part of a political dynasty, and your history in politics and how you originally got into politics does pertain to your political, your family's background. And in this day and age, we talk a lot about civic engagement and getting, anyone from any class and any background into politics. And you haven't had that past. So how do you address that? How do you say, I want to make sure everyone is involved in politics, but I got into politics through a connection?
It's a great question. And so thanks for asking. A couple of things, I guess, the way that I think about it. One is that our country, kind of from a principle level, our country is stronger the more people participate in our democracy. And so that can be community activism, that can be running for office, that can be community engagement, that can be running nonprofits, that can be any sort of service, Teach for America, military service, mentoring, anybody else. I grew up in a family where this form of public service anyway, elected office, was not so foreign. So just like I'm sure you met colleagues of your coworkers of your parents, I met coworkers of my dad or other family members. They happened to be congressmen and senators, but they were still just like, when I was 12, they were people and I couldn't care less what they were or who they were. It was just like they were in front of your dad's. But it meant that aspects of running for office were not nearly as foreign to me as they probably were for other people. And there's no doubt, to your point, that when I first ran for office, that I benefited immensely from the connections or perception that people had, particularly in Massachusetts, about the contributions that my family had made. The way that I try to then think of that is to make sure to recognize that whether you like it or not, I am the beneficiary of it, but that principle, that if you believe in a strong, healthy democracy, that means that this has to be open to everybody, or more people anyway, is to try to leverage the opportunities that I have to try to make sure that the government is in fact, and our political process is in fact more open to everybody. So somebody mentioned on the way in, I've done an awful lot of work trying to advocate for and highlight the challenges of the trans community, not just here in Massachusetts, but around the country. Because still today, as a straight white guy, I have stronger, more robust legal protections in this country than other people do in this country who are just as much an American citizen as I am. That etched in stone above the doors of the Supreme Court say equal justice under law, literally. And yet, we still do not have it. And so whether it's on voting rights, whether it's on immigration, whether it's on transgender rights, LGBT rights, to try to push our government as fast as I can, as hard as I can, to open up those doors as wide as we can. And that doesn't necessarily mean, one, I'll do it the way everybody would want, or two, I necessarily do it the way that some people think is right. But I do think that from somebody that does stand for re-election every 2 years, that tries to run on a record and say, this is what I've done, this is the value, these are the values that I hold, this is the vision that I have, and this is what I'm trying to do with that privileged station that I enjoy, I put that out there to folks to be able to ask questions, to vet, to evaluate, and to make sure, to kind of test whether they think I'm doing a good enough job of that or not. Does that make sense? Thanks, it's a great question. Do people want me to ask it? We'll go, I guess, right over there, and we'll work this way. Yeah, right behind you. She's got the microphone, sorry.
In one of my classes, we're doing a Civic Engagement project, and I was wondering, what do you think is the best way to get people to pay attention to the things you care about?
The best way to get people, what's your name?
Emma.
Emma? The best way to get people to care about the things that they care about is to show them how this policy matters. And to show them that, look, for better or worse, government matters. I cannot tell you how many times I've heard, look, it just doesn't matter if I vote, they're all the same. We are not all the same. I with due respect to anybody that might think that, I am not the same as Donald Trump, for better or worse. And there might be some Donald Trump supporters in here. That's fine if you are. Plenty of my friends in Congress are Republicans. They love this president. I can't stand this president. But there are big differences between the way that this president will go about his interpretation of his job and the way that I believe this president should go about his job. And so whether it comes down to issues around comprehensive sexual education or immigration or climate change or healthcare, the reality of this is that the structures and the policies that the federal government shape have an enormous impact on how our society functions or does not. And the reality is, I think, particularly now, getting back to, was it Roz's question? Close? Oh, sorry. One of the central critiques that I would argue about this administration is that they look at how well our society is doing for those that already have and tout those metrics and those stories. And they do not look at all about how far behind that methodology is leaving everybody else. And government's responsibility to our citizens is that everyone counts. Every story is heard, every person is seen, and that you count, your government's got your back. And that's the piece here that I don't think that this administration cares about or understands or is going to give any credence to. And so if you care, whatever issue it is that you care about, for those of us that, from federal policy on down, understanding, trying to make and articulate those linkages from the decision to pull out of a Paris Climate Accord. And pulling out of Paris in and of itself might not sound like much, but what it means is that you're going to have a federal government that is ignoring the fact that climate change actually exists and is real for 4 more years. And a very real chance that Donald Trump wins re-election. So it could be 6 more years. And do we really have 6 more years to waste? And if you don't think we do, then we need you on the field. Pass the mic right up front to the...
Before we go to the next question, I just want to celebrate Ms. Winston and Dr. Turner for saying that we're going to extend this till 10:55 when the congressman has to leave.
And you guys thought the
So
fire
you
alarm would
guys
get you out of this early.
Don't have to leave at
Too bad.
10:45 or 9:45. Is it 10:45?
Okay, so this is more of a local issue, but I'm interested in your take on it.
What's your name?
I'm Harper, I'm a senior.
Harper?
Yeah, so you might,
Congratulations, by the way.
thank you. You might be aware of some of what's been happening in the school district. So there's a pro-Israel group, Americans for Peace and Tolerance, that's brought a lawsuit against several of the history teachers here and at Newton South. And so I'm actually in one of the classes that is the subject of the lawsuit, Miala, Middle East, Asia, Latin America, and the Israel-Palestine conflict, and the teachers' teaching of that conflict is one of the controversies that's been brought by this group. So I'm interested in sort of hearing about, you know, keeping public education independent of sort of like influence of outside groups, and sort of if there's anything that's being done about that, if you know, on the local level or on the federal level, or sort of like what the laws are in place about that. I'm sure it's more of a local thing, but it's just a very important issue here right now, so.
Harper, right?
Yes.
Great question. So I do know about it. I know a little bit about it. I know that the lawsuit exists. I don't know the inner details of it. I know that, so without getting into that, I think speaking on the principles of it, right? One, I don't think that there's a place for the teaching of anti-Semitism anywhere, right? And I think that that's a pretty strong value that is widely held and widely shared. I think there's a way to make sure that we don't teach anti-Semitism while also recognizing that history in a number of places around the world, here in the United States, and certainly in the Middle East, gets complicated, and some of that depends on your viewpoint. But sticking to historical facts and then offering interpretations of those facts from folks on different sides is also a valuable exercise as we try to teach a next generation of American citizens what, in fact, critical thinking and history is, in fact, all about. And so I think there's a way to acknowledge one and acknowledge the other and stick true to those values and history and the various ways in which history has been interpreted, but to recognize that that has also been subject to interpretation, and that as people do pick out various data points and spin arguments around those data points, to be able to say and teach the fact that there's other data points out there that either contradict that or that can be used to craft a different narrative. That I think is critically important in the entire point of an education. You had a question over here, just to try to get a couple guys in there.
Yeah, I'm Jacob. I'm a
Sure.
sophomore.
We'll get to you next. Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
All good. Go for it,
I
Jacob.
was wondering what your thoughts were on the Muller report and a possible impeachment.
Yeah, great question. And surprised it took that long. And interestingly, none of you in that entire exercise of issues that we care about, no one brought up Muller or Russia. So short answer on it at the moment. I'm still working my way through the report. I have not finished it, but I think it's really important that at least members of Congress read as much of it as we can. I hope more of it becomes public because reading redacted pages is not all that helpful. Let me get 2 parts of it. I think the overall general basics on it are actually very clear and are not surprising and extremely disturbing. So one, there was an attack on our democracy by a foreign adversary to try to influence an election. 2, campaign officials campaign officials for a presidential nominee knew about it and thought that they would benefit from it and did nothing to actually discourage it. 4, when confronted with information about this and other aspects during the Trump campaign and administration, the President of the United States engaged in multiple acts, affirmative and by omission, to try to influence that investigation, such that the individual in charge of determining what happened could not exonerate the President of the United States from obstruction of justice. That is an extremely damning and damaging critique of the President of the United States. What I think has to happen next, one, so Attorney General Barr is going to come before Congress, House, and Senate and speak. I don't expect necessarily there to be a whole lot of additional information gleaned from those interviews. We have seen the Attorney General, who I think by all accounts is a very talented lawyer, but has had multiple opportunities to stand up as the Attorney General as the chief law enforcement officer for the United States to defend every single American citizen and the Constitution, and instead has chosen to find ways to defend the president. The press conference was not, by any stretch, an objective reading of what the report was. The 4-page letter was also not an objective reading of what Mueller, in fact, decided. I do think, and I hope, although it has not been scheduled yet, that the special counsel, Mr. Mueller, will come testify. I think there's a number of questions that lawmakers on both sides of the aisle rightfully will have for him. Some of that, it comes down to the judgment about what some of his decisions were, why and why not, some of this was played out in the report, why they decided not to pursue an in-person interview with the president, despite the fact that they acknowledged that his answers were inadequate, why they accepted, given that he has said he has the world's greatest memory, why he accepted I cannot recall over and over and over again. Why, if on page 2 of the document itself, Mr. Mueller indicates that because of existing Department of Justice guidelines and the existence of this memo, that a sitting president cannot be indicted. Well, if that's the case, you could never bring charges to begin with. Why are we celebrating the fact that you didn't bring charges? That part we knew, as long as he was going to adhere to that doctrine, that part was known from the start. So some of my conservative colleagues are resting on that. Well, that's not the part to rest on. And so I think one question that I would have for him is, if that guidance was not there, would he have brought charges? And we'll see whether that question gets asked. I expect it will. Whether it gets answered, I'm not sure. So my own next step in this is, I think it's extremely valuable to have Mr. Mueller come in and testify. Yeah, because we skipped you.
So a few minutes ago, we asked about climate change, which virtually everybody's hand went up.
Climate change, everybody's hand went up, but.
So my main question is, 1, how screwed are we? And 2, from the perspective of a high school student who maybe feels like they don't have a great impact on politics, what do you think the best thing is that I or one of my classmates can do in this very moment?
So from the perspective of a high school student, with regards to climate change, 1, how screwed are we? Sorry for the use of the term. How screwed are we? And then 2, what can we do about it? 1, how screwed are we? It doesn't look great. Particularly if we continue doing what we're doing, right? I mean, you read the same reports of this stuff that I do, probably. I might read some additional ones, but, you know, if you believe the science, I haven't found one deeply cited, acknowledged scientific article that said, you know what, like, this is totally overblown, things are gonna be fine. So I think we're in trouble. We do not have to be in trouble. Right? There are steps that we can take to mitigate the impacts of climate change, but the sooner we do that, the better. So what can we do about it? First, I would urge you to not accept the premise of your first question. Because I'm a high school student, I don't feel that baloney. The House of Representatives just passed the 2 biggest measures to combat gun violence in this country in 25 years. I will tell you, as a member of the House of Representatives, we would not have done that without high school students. Period. Would not have happened. Okay? That was high school student, that was a culmination of tragedy after tragedy, but that then was a culmination of that outrage and passion that spread to high schools all over this country that just said, we will not accept this. We will not accept the fact that that is the price of freedom in this country is that we, when we go to school, are taking our lives at risk. No. And you didn't. And you helped flip the House of Representatives because of it. There are 14 Republican colleagues of mine, former colleagues of mine, that had an A rating from the NRA that lost to challengers, Democratic challengers, with an F rating from the NRA. So, is this a hard thing to do? Yes, it is. Can it be done? Yes, it can. Is that going to be a reflection as to just how badly constituents want to actually hold those members that are withholding progress accountable? Yeah, it probably will. And so what can we do about it? Push. Now, I say that, also being your member of Congress who thinks that I'm pretty good on this one, so like, you can push, but like, don't push me too hard. I say that as a joke. Push as hard as you feel like you need to push. I do say that though. I'm with you. The challenge on this is trying to make sure that other members in other parts of the country are with us as well. Less of a challenge with the House of Representatives given the fact that we want it and we're in charge. Bigger challenge in the Senate, bigger challenge in the presidency. But you have a chance over the course of the next 18 months to make climate change one of the pivotal issues that not only is going to be an indication as to who wins a Democratic nomination, but then as to what our nominee and the current President of the United States, how they will respond to it when they take the next oath of office in January 2021, and whether they're going to acknowledge it and do something about it or not. And that means that in states that might not be as leaning into this as aggressively as Massachusetts is, but states that have just as much to lose as anywhere else, because we all lose on this one. Michigan, Florida, Texas, Nevada, Pennsylvania. Right? They've got high school students too. They've got people that are concerned about the way that they are going to be able to meet the world that they're going to inherit and how they're going to be able to get a job, or their climate is going to be changing underneath them, or impact of droughts and storms and all the rest of it. And so I would urge you to find ways to link up with other high schools around the country to push those local representatives. And federal policy is obviously critically important in this one, but state policy is pretty darn important too. And a whole bunch of high school students banding together in one state representative district in Florida might be enough to push that state representative to change his or her position or evolve their position to something that is going to be more aggressive than they might otherwise have been. And if you can force that issue through the state house in Florida or state house in Pennsylvania, that in and of itself is going to be a major change. Florida is on the impacts of this, one, because of hurricanes, two, because of bleaching of coral reefs. Their tourism industry is a massive part of their economy. They lose that, they're in big trouble. Framing this issue as an economic one, not one based off of trying to put people out of work or take your job away, is a big deal to this one too. Great question.
Thank you. I think we have one last question from over here.
Hi.
Where are you?
I'm Jay. Hi.
Hi. What's your
I'm
name?
Jay. I'm a freshman. And actually I have two questions. They're kind of quick. The first one is, what is the greatest opposition, in your personal opinion, that is preventing real fundamental change from being able to take place in our government?
Yep.
Oh, and the second one is, with the evolution of larger companies such as Walmart, Amazon, and I don't know, like car companies, how do you think we could combat the development of monopolies that bypass a lot of the current monopoly rules and laws set in place to prevent tycoons, such as the Rockwell companies from the 1900s, from being able to be implemented once again in our country and put smaller businesses out of business?
Boom. Okay, great question. So your first one, impediments to change, two things. And if I could solve, if you made me king for a day, what I would change, nonpartisan redistricting. Make it so that voters choose their congressmen, not congressmen choose their voters. Congresswomen choose their voters, right? Nonpartisan redistricting, massive. You've heard some of the conversation we've had already about folks that have to run to the extremes and empowered to run to the extremes rather than bipartisanship and finding ways to compromise. The fact that you have districts that are drawn that reflect extreme viewpoints rather than the vast majority of where the American public is a big driving force in that. The second one, and the kicker in it, campaign finance reform. You solve those two issues, you get the influence of money out of politics and find ways to elevate the voice of the average American voter, the average American citizen. You start incentivizing your government to be responsive to the vast majority of Americans rather than just the ones that vote on certain issues and have the ability to spend an awful lot of money to influence those decisions. Those two things would give you a massive change in outcome on all of the other policy issues that we talked about here today. Because it turns out on a number of those issues, climate change, gun violence, taxes, healthcare, immigration, the vast majority of Americans actually agree on the vast majority of pieces to it. We don't agree on everything, but you agree on 80 to 90% on an awful lot of it. It's the last pieces that we don't, but that debate doesn't actually happen with kind of the vast majority of the American people at the table. The second piece, so when we were back into the second piece about monopolies and kind of how we as a society dealt with the impacts of the robber barons way back when. It was, as I think you alluded to, and it sounds like you know, through antitrust law and the passage of antitrust law and then the effective implementation and enforcement of antitrust law. There's a couple of different kind of schools of thought on that at the moment. One, whether antitrust is being sufficiently, the existing law is being used sufficiently at the moment to stop the aggregation of economic power, because we're seeing mergers across airlines and healthcare and telecom and a whole bunch of other industries as they consolidate into, there's now like 3 health insurance companies in this country. So whether antitrust is being used enough as is currently designed, and two, whether that law needs to be updated, and one of the big areas of focus is to look at monopsony power, not just monopoly power. So monopoly looks at the impact of price. Monopsony looks at the impact on labor markets and wages. So if you're we'll make it basic, if you're a doctor, this is oversimplified a bit, but if you're a doctor and you're trying to negotiate a reimbursement rate from a health insurance company, if you can only go to one or two different, there's only 2 major health insurance companies that are operating, you don't have much of an ability to negotiate because you're either take it or leave it from one or the other, and they have so many patients that you basically are at the mercy of that company. Well, if you had a whole bunch of different opportunities to negotiate, and each one of those represented a number of different providers, or payers, you might have an ability to negotiate a higher rate, right? And the impact from an insurance company saying, hey, look, doc, we have 2/3 of the patients in your state. If you don't take us, you're gonna lower your patients by 2/3. The doctor ends up being a price taker, not part of an actual negotiation. So part of the question is does antitrust law actually have to be updated to acknowledge some of the fundamental changes in our economy, impact of labor markets, and then 2, the impact of software and intangible things. So you're no longer just making cars or widgets or clothes or something. Right? You're making something that has a license that then can get emailed or shared around the world. And that has major impacts with regards to automation, with regards to education, with regards to a lot of other factors. And so given that, how does antitrust law have to evolve to make sure that you're not allowing for that massive consolidation? And that will be that debate is an emerging one, and that's a big, big fight, because as you alluded to, there's an awful lot of interest on one side of that to try to keep things the way they are. Last piece. When you highlighted something like Walmart or aspects of Amazon, much of that focus gets kind of put on the tech folks that are writing the code or something at Amazon. Remember, there's also an awful lot of folks that are working in an Amazon distribution facility that are like literally filling orders in boxes. So a big piece to this is also about, from my perspective, worker empowerment. And how do we restructure the incentives in our economy to empower American workers to provide for their families and meet their own aspirations and dreams? And that's things like a minimum wage, collective bargaining. It's other aspects of our society too, meeting things like the need for childcare. We exist in a system at the moment where our economy largely is now driven by the expectation is that both parents are going to work, but we still have a safety net behind it that expects that largely mom is going to sit there and take care of the kids. That you can't have both. The average cost of childcare from 0 to 5 in this state is $17,000 per child per year. It's more than tuition at University of Massachusetts. How is anybody supposed to make that work? So there's ways to do this that look at antitrust. There's also ways to look at this and just say, hey, what are the underlying factors that families and employees are confronting? And how do you actually make it easier for you to literally survive? And if you do that and you're asking more of companies to help folks, those employees afford it, either through increasing collective bargaining, increasing benefits, increasing wages, increase through a contribution to afford childcare, you all of a sudden address some of these concerns as well. So, multifaceted approach. Great question.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Kennedy. Great. Thank you all very much.